Hello, my fellow Hyborian Age enthusiasts. Thought I'd decide to wash the taste of the previous issue of this particular series out with some good stuff right here. But before we get started, I am going to be putting a little bit of a hiatus for the rest of the month of September for the simple reason that I'm getting married soon, and I'm going to be A, quite busy with that, and 2, with my honeymoon for the rest of the month. So bear with me. I'll be back sometime in October for those who enjoy the streaming and the YouTubing and all that stuff. I'm a very happy man. So, that out of the way. Iron Shadows in the Moonlight. Les chimères de fer dans la clarté lunaire, as the French title goes. This story was originally written by Robert E. Howard in Weird Tales of April 1934. It's been previously adapted, of course, as you can probably imagine, in the Tales of Savage Sword of Conan by the legendary trio of Roy Thomas, John Buscema, and Alfredo Alcala. Sorry, Alfredo. That was in 1974 for Savage Sword of Conan number 4. And then later on, in 2010, Dark Horse did their own comic adaptation for issues of Conan the Cimmerian number 22 through 25. That was Tim Truman and Thomas Giorello, who did the adaptation of the story for them. This one is being done by one person. It is Miss Virginie Augustin. She's mostly been in the artistic side, the illustration side for when it comes to BDs. She's done a little bit of script writing, but this is probably one of her major ones in that regard. She's mostly done a lot of artwork, and her stuff has a bit of variety to it. She can do both fairly realistic and downright cartoony, depending on the tenor of the actual work in question. Here, in this case, it's very much on the prior side, and she does an excellent job. Let me just get this out of the way. As I mentioned in my last video, the previous album was a disappointment to me. This one is not. This is back on track with gangbusters. This one is not only an excellent adaptation of the original story, but artistically I have lots of good things to say about this. Like, just from the start, you have the damsel of the day, Miss Olivia, a slave to a terrible Shah named Amurath, Harkanian bastard, as Conan would call him. And he's finally caught up to her after she escaped from his camp, only for Conan to emerge from the swamp to confront him for some previous personal vendetta problems. And just the way he's brought in, panel after panel, close up on his chest covered in mud and muck, then on his eyes burning with blue flame of vengeance, and then finally just, straight into a fight. So already you're off to a good start with this thing. Not to mention that, Olivia looks goddamn good. I would say all the characters look really good in this. The detail on the faces, the detail in general, is very excellent here. One thing that this reminds me of is also the use of color and texture and line work. It's very much reminiscent of the previous albums, like for instance Black Colossus or Beyond the Black River there, where the color was very well used to enhance the environment, the feel of the environment that the characters take place in. And the same applies here. Like throughout, as they leave the swamp and escape, and then eventually end up on a deserted, seemingly deserted island, in the jungle covered island. Just the feeling when you see like panels, for instance, here on page 15 here, as we first enter the deep jungle, the line work here, the texture, the shadows, the deep greens, everything really says this is jungle. This is very much hostile wilderness. And the same goes again with once night falls, you get that same kind of deep blues from the full moonlit sky combined with deep blacks, the shadows. It all very much feels very, very well done. And even areas where there's less line work, you still get the texturing from the layers of color in the background to really, even though the forest is not really that important to the scene itself, since it's usually for instance, Conan fighting a bunch of pirates from the Red Brotherhood. You do end up, however, getting that feeling of the environment just from the layering of the colors. You can see the trees kind of fading into the background like a mist or something like that, and it works really, really well. See, other things. There's other little flourishes here and there. Moments of extreme violence or suffering are usually depicted with very, completely red panels. So, like the first instance here is page 6. Shamura is about to get done in by Conan. And the final moment is just this blood spatter. Red panel, blood spatter with Olivia holding her head as we hear him screaming. So, and then immediately the next page, Conan standing over his bloody corpse, as is appropriate. We later on just page 9, as she's retelling her tale to Conan and why she escaped from this guy. Spoiler warning, he was a bastard, a terrible bastard to her. Basically, she was tortured and, abused in every way, shape, or form by her master here. And the whole thing has this dark orange-red tone to it as well. And the same goes for the next page, where Conan tells her his misadventures as his army was destroyed by the same guy. And there it's a sunset, orange over, a field of corpses and such as that. And the same goes for other areas as well. You have Conan fighting a great ape at one point during the story. And there, at the moment where he cuts off the great ape's arm with his saber, then also red panel. And the same when he finally gives a killing blow to the creature, there again, full red. So there's very much that punctuation of the violence and suffering that happens. And of course, the primary one is the full page panel here, splash panel, on page 55, when the pirates that Conan encounters, who made the mistake of staying in the lost city that's on this island after dark when the full moon comes up, getting slaughtered by the titular iron shadows. All the while, the screaming of the various parrots of the magic spell that has created this whole carnage. The moon there in the center, and all the scenes of the most grotesque violence in the entire album being depicted here. Ironically, in the original story, this part is not really shown, as you couldn't really back then, certain, cultural restrictions, as it were. There, you just hear the screaming of the pirates as Conan and Olivia are escaping. But, ever since the original Marvel adaptation, this has, been shown. However, I don't think it's ever been shown quite this brutally. This is nasty as hell. I mean, this one guy with his head being held aloft and just crushed in this thing's hands. Ugh, I love it. Yeah. So that was that. There's even smaller moments. Conan gets knocked out with a sling stone, and on page 41 here. And even then, it's not a very violent moment, but it still shows him in a kind of an orange panel, just white and him colored orange. It kind of falls into that same theme there of violence being accompanied by that color scheme. So it's a nice continuation on that. Another major theme is focus on eyes. A lot of the time, there's the original moment where Conan first appears, of course, and then of course there's the titular iron shadows, the strange men. Well, men. It's hard to say whether they're actually human at one point, but they were definitely humanoid creatures who were transformed into the iron statues after they did some really nasty stuff to a demigod, and his dad really didn't appreciate it. In this case, they're most often depicted, in their sleeping form, they're depicted in the niches in their lost city, and there they're surrounded by darkness. The first one is on page 21, where we first encounter them in their own city there, as Conan and Olivia enter it. And right there at the bottom is pretty much their typical depiction. Standing completely still, covered in cobwebs and, the dust of ages, and just surrounded by darkness. A dark shape surrounded by darkness. That is pretty much their thematic origin there. And as we get through there, as we get further along the story, you often come back to seeing that close-up of those faces. I would describe it as hawk-like, predatory faces with closed eyes, just waiting to awaken. And there's definitely a sense of menace surrounding them at all times, which is nice. Especially the way they're depicted, which is very lean but still powerful, and they're built if you've ever watched Christian Bale and The Machinist, they're very much built like that. It's got some muscle, but it's unsightly and unhealthy looking, which is a nice touch. It makes them look nice and creepy. But throughout it, especially as they start to awaken in various places, you get close-ups on their eyes as they just slightly increase in size just a little bit more, and there's just red fire and glow behind them, and it's very much a creepy-ass depiction of these creatures, especially like on page 49 when they're just about ready to go to town on the pirates. And there's that moment where Olivia is cutting Conan loose after he's been captured, and it just focuses on the feet, then moves up their body, up to the face, cut with Conan getting loose and him and Olivia just getting the hell out of there. Because they both know they don't stand a chance against these things. This is one of those things about Conan that often gets ignored. He knows when to cut and run when he's facing something supernatural and he doesn't have the means of defending himself against it. So that's the smart thing about this guy. But yeah, as the moment just grows and these things keep waking up, yeah, definitely time to get the hell out of there. As we see with the pirates back on page 55, they should have done the same very, very quickly, and they didn't, to their regret. Well, the ones that lived, they get to regret. The rest of them, not quite so much. I could go on. But there's also there's also a moment where Olivia's dreaming of, for some reason, the past of this city. Apparently she's just sensitive to this kind of thing. And there's this depiction there of, as I mentioned, that demigod who is being tortured by these beings, and is eventually, after it dies, his dad shows up and just like, "Oh, you bastards," and curses them all. And there, you very much have this juxtaposition of them completely black, and this being, this strange being that's evidently, at least partially human, completely white, being attached to an all-white pillar under a full white moon. And there's very much that the juxtaposition there. It's almost, you could almost say that the entire thing is black and white, except for a little bit of texturing and the fact that the parrots that are flying through the sky are, of course, in color. I mean, this whole section could have been depicted completely in black and white, and it wouldn't have changed anything, really. Although I do think that the god being itself is a bit on the greenish side. It's hard to say. It's not quite a pure white, although it's more like a moonlight white, if that makes sense, which ultimately is completely appropriate for the story. About the only thing I would say that is a problem art-wise is that the city of these creatures isn't green enough. Okay, let me explain. At one point, Conan gets a big rock thrown at him. It's around on page 17-18 here. This happens in the story as well. This is a very, very faithful adaptation of the story, by the way. There's really nothing particularly added, nothing removed. It's straight to the point, extremely well adapted. So points for that. But here, it's depicted as as it is in the book, a big stone, not quite jade, but something similar to that got chucked at them, and then Conan's like, "Okay, no human being could throw this. I can barely toss this thing a couple of meters. This thing came flying out of the jungle. Something's not right here." And then the next page, they go exploring, and they find the actual lost city, the ruins of it. And here, they're very much not maybe marble or limestone, something like a very pale whitish color. They're not the same green. And it's not an important point, but those greenstone cities are a recurring theme throughout the Conan stories. You have the same kind of things in Zuthal of the Dusk, in Red Nails, Pool of the Black Ones, Devil in Iron. It's the sign of some kind of larger scale prehistory that came before the Hyborian Age itself, before Conan's time. And it's reference to these ancient demon-haunted ruins that evidently had some kind of connection in terms of the civilizations that built them. And, there's never an explanation for that in the actual Conan stories, but it's a recurring theme that if you read them all, you start noticing that. And that's, a pretty cool thing. Yeah. So that's about the only negative I have for the artwork. Everything else is excellent. The script is excellent. The artwork is excellent. And even though it is a straight adaptation of the story, there is some interesting touches. As that vision I mentioned earlier, that dream starts in the story. The way it's scripted is like this: Olivia dreamed, and through her dreams crawled a suggestion of lurking evil, like a black serpent writhing through flower gardens. Yeah, some good Howard prose right there. In the story here on page 26, as the dream is taking part, there's literally a serpent appear on page, crawling around one of these iron statues. And, you know, it's very much that line rendered literally on page. So there are some personal flourishes to that. Just because you're doing an adaptation of something doesn't mean you can't add your own personality to it and yet stay faithful to the actual story you're adapting. Just saying, you know? Yeah. Also, I have to say, in terms of eye candy, because let's face it, there is some eye candy here. Olivia looks damn good, but I gotta say, Conan's looking pretty good too. And in fact, I think one could, surmise that yes, the woman did do this issue, because what is this? Page 14. He gets the James Bond Casino Royale treatment, as he's the one who has essentially a bath scene right there coming out of the surf around the beach. I don't know. I'm thinking some ladies are going to like this. He's definitely depicted as powerful and intimidating, but also, easy on the eyes. This is Conan. He's a very handsome dude. Which doesn't say anything that's taken off of Olivia either. She is a damn well-drawn lady. Let's just say that. You can see why the Shah didn't want to give her up, that's for sure. To his regret. Frankly, he should have let her go and let's just let bygones be bygones with Conan. But what are you going to do, right? Vengeance is a bitch. Yeah. What is not a bitch, however, Iron Shadows in the Moonlight. This is an excellent bande dessinée. And I really hope that Virginie Augustin does more sword and sorcery stuff, because she's good at it. I mean, she doesn't have, as far as I can tell, that much writing experience. She's done a few other things, but mostly she does, artwork. But if she wants to do this kind of style of artwork on more stuff, I will not complain. That's for sure. So yeah, this has been Chimère de Fer dans la clarté lunaire. This has been from Glénat Éditions. You can get it wherever you get your bande dessinée from. I have been Zero Sum. Like, share, subscribe, all this stuff. I'm getting married, motherfuckers. I'll see you later on, maybe in October or something. Till then, bye-bye.